In the name of the living God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. So Advent is a time of messages. A time of messages, messages from God. And the Bible has recordings of these messages like 3,000-year-old, like texting. And we can read in the texting between the lines what are the messages that are coming from God. And sometimes it's when we're, as a human race, we're getting off the rails. And the messages are usually doom and gloom. And we wonder about that. And sometimes they're messages that we don't expect, or messages that we don't hear, or messages that we really don't believe that we can live into. So Advent is about messages. And if I was going to sum up the messages from God over the centuries, it might sound something like this. Humanity, I love rediscovering you in all your wayward complexities, and I always will. Humanity, I love rediscovering you in all your wayward complexities, and I always will. You know, when you get on that plane, I don't know what you do when you get on a plane to go on a vacation or a journey, but usually I'll get my book out and my headset and my phones, and then the air stewards go through their ritual. It's kind of like liturgical flight. Go through their rituals, and they talk about the way, in the uneventful situation where we might have a water landing, there's a yellow inflatable so that we can find your body. And so most of us just tune that out. It's all kind of doom and gloom, right? But what's very interesting is you realize at that point that they're not just waiters and waitresses bringing us our drinks and our peanuts, but they're air safety officers. Their job, more than anything, is to make sure that we are kept safe and secure. And so sometimes the Advent messages are about the what we consider the doom and gloom. It's like, in the unlikely event of a water landing, you have to do this or that. So that's one way of looking at some of the messages that we will hear in Advent as we are going through it. And sometimes those messages are about a vision that we really can't get our heads around. I'll give you an example. If God told us that 20 years from now, St. Paul's Church would be one of the most important churches in the United States, because it somehow balances this wonderful offering of traditional liturgy and music, the best in the world in terms of its Anglican roots and its music and the organ and the choir, and at the same time it links together contemporary Christian worship and Christian songs, and it balances outreach, it's the care for the community, with sustainability. How St. Paul's is a wonderful example of what it means to be a green church. Right? Imagine if God told us 20 years from now that was the vision for St. Paul's. And many of us would have a hard time figuring that out. We would say, we'd rather be the little parish of Chestnut Hill, where we just take care of one another and we just muddle along, and we just have our little Episcopal way of doing things, and that we don't particularly want that vision, thank you very much. The Isaiah reading today is like that a couple of thousand years ago, because when Isaiah was the prophet in Jerusalem, people were just concerned about their own little Jewish relationship they had with God. They had this lovely temple, they had their special relationship with God, they were God's chosen people, but the image that Isaiah uses is there's been a huge change in topography, that now Mount Zion, the hill that cathedral, the hill that the temple is sitting on, is now the highest mountain in the world. So there has been a seismic shift, not only in the landscape, but in the thinking, that God is no longer our God of territory, but God is the God of the whole universe, and that all of the nations will come to a realization and a unity that brings peace and stability and prosperity It's an amazing vision, but it's about getting knocked out of our small-minded, your God is too small mentality. So that was a way in which the Advent message through Isaiah, came to him differently. And the writer to the Christians in Rome that Charlie read is also a different message. It's a kind of wake-up call to live differently in the world from the way your neighbors live. And they talk about this idea of being children of the light. Being children of the light, and to move beyond your selfishness and your preoccupation with these pleasures that pass away, and to have a different kind of moral framework of being in the world. And they use this image of putting on the armor of light and becoming children of light in the midst of the darkness. And it's a wonderful image, and that we use it in our collect today to cast away the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. And the community that is obviously quarreling and in some form of jealousy and rivalry also, as children of the light, live differently, as we are Christ's body in the world and move beyond our own self-gratification. And this idea of the children of the light and the darkness is a very ancient mythology. They're probably the myths from Babylon, 600 years before the time of Jesus. Jesus, as a little boy, would have kind of watched and read these stories like Star Wars. And he believed, as a first century Jew, that one day there would be this kind of superhero, and it was called the Son of Man, who would come out of the clouds in deliverance and to save the world. And it's interesting that Jesus is fascinated by this image that there will be some kind of apocalyptic upheaval, not bigger than the earthquake that causes the temple to be the moral compass for the planet. There will be a kind of cosmic upheaval, and that he sees in his own ministry that is a kind of the fuse is lit, and that something is going to happen. And it's going to be arbitrary. There's going to be one person who's going to be left in the field, the other is taken. It's going to be something that we find difficult to imagine. It's not that the goody-goody people are going to be, sucked up into heaven. That's not the image that he uses. There's something that's not arbitrary about it. And it's this day of deliverance that he looks forward to. And he uses references of the flood, Noah, the idea that you have a family and they're living in a culture that is oblivious. They are eating and drinking and marrying, just getting on with life and everything. And guess what? There's a flood that's going to come. And you have this little guy, Noah, and his wife and his family, and all the animals in the ark, and that metaphor that what is saved out of humanity that goes on and continues. And we are the children of Noah. So these metaphors, these messages that we use in Advent are very, very important. And I want to contemporize it today. There were two reports that I heard about this week. Two reports that are significant and in their own way kind of prophetic messages. One was the economic statistics that were released after Black Friday, right? Black Friday. $4.2 billion in sales in this country. 45% on mobile phones. Extraordinary. Think about 20 years ago, that was inconceivable, right? And so the economy is so now dependent on technology and so on, and you think about that, that's an amazing number to get our heads around. In just one day, the amount of economic transaction and the exchange of goods in this country, that's one report. The other report came out on Tuesday from the United Nations, and it was a report on climate change. And again, it's to me, these are the messages of the prophets in our own day. And basically what they're saying is that the 10 major indicators that we are moving into a major uptick in the heating of the planet, that the goals that we've tried to set to keep the warming of the planet to under 2% a year, that there are 5 or 6 major indicators that are already cascading. They use the term that they are cascading. And so we're moving into an area where we're just not paying attention to the effects of climate change and global warming in our planet. And both reports, for me, are a kind of Advent wake-up call. In 2017, disasters triggered by weather and climate-related hazards led to a staggering $320 billion in losses. And also in 2017, devastating floods in South Asia took over 1,200 lives, while communities in the Caribbean are still struggling to recover from the unprecedented hurricane season. And that moves into healthcare, it moves into health outcomes, and it is thought that by the year, this is a horrific statistic, by the year 2050, there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish, right? And so this is what we are passing on to our grandchildren. Our grandchildren are going to be living in this place. This kind of business as usual growth could mean that over 140 million climate migrants by the year 2050, according to the World Bank. And that's double, basically, the total number of all refugees that we're dealing with today. And you think about how politically upsetting refugees have become all over the world. And so that's going to get much worse. You know, one of the things that we discussed in our vestry at the last meeting was how do we as a church take some responsibility and begin to address the things that we're hearing from the UN and from our scientists and so on. So the vestry made, I think, a very courageous decision to change from fossil fuels, that we now, PICO can give everybody an opportunity that if you want to change where you get your power from, you can move into wind or solar or other forms of energy. So the vestry made a decision that this parish is going to do that. And we have a sustainability committee that's also advising us in the next year is how do we move into the greening of this space? How do we make that work as we move forward? And maybe how we in our homes, we can be more responsible and kind of make some changes in the way we live. So I want us to think about Advent, the different ways in which we are hearing basically the same message from God, that I love rediscovering you in all your wayward ways, and I always will. Amen. We have a very special treat this morning as part of our Advent theme, and one of the great programs that we have at St. Paul's is Godly Play. It's a way in which we teach our children the wonderful stories of the Bible and a mystery and ritual, all the things that as Episcopalians we love. And so Kathleen is going to demonstrate one of the ways in which we pass on these stories to our children. And it is a special story about Advent.